On the order. Pledge of allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Dom.
Here.
Vice President Everard.
Here.
Treasurer Gayton.
Here.
Secretary Fritz. Trustee Thomas. Absent. Trustee Zimmerman. And Trustee Wazor.
Let's see, there are a few names I don't recognize, so let me just again take a look here. Anyone that's wishing to make public comment? If you could raise your hand. And some of you don't have your cameras on, so I won't recognize unless you find the icon that shows your hand raising to make comment. I see a few names that I don't know that are staff. One is not a member of the public, but I don't know that they're looking to make comment.
Okay, well, we'll go on.
We have another place for public comments.
Move on to our application. Oh,
I'm going to stop share here. And let me just make our guests that are with us this evening as co-hosts. All right. So, yeah. Wonderful. Well, as they're getting set up tonight, we have a presentation for you from the Trust for Public Land. And just as a little bit of background, the Conservation District and the McHenry County Conservation Foundation reached out. We've been working since the board adopted our Sustaining the Dream financial framework plan several years ago. Started with our working groups of trustees and then on to our second working group where we had some representatives of our foundation and wanted to bring in technical assistance advice from Trust for Public Land. And so we sent a letter out to them and they graciously agreed to lend a hand to us. So tonight you have the work product that they've been doing on our behalf. And I'd like to introduce Will Abinger with Trust for Public Land, and then can do the self-introductions of the team. Will, thank you for being here, and Andrew as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank the Chairman Dom and the members of the Board of Trustees for allowing us to present to you this evening. We're really pleased to be working with McHenry County Conservation District again. We had the great good fortune of working with you in 2007 on your successful funding measure. There are really three things we want to cover. Just a quick introduction to the Trust for Public Land and in particular our conservation finance program, but then very quickly to get into the feasibility study that we've been working on for the Conservation District and then talk about some next steps by way of introductions. I'm Will Abinger. I direct TPL's conservation finance program. And I'm joined by my colleague, Andrew DeMolin. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew DeMolin. I work for TPL's Conservation and Finance Research Program based just outside of Boston. Thanks for the opportunity to work on the report.
And Andrew's really the principal author of the report, so much of this is his work. I also want to, before we kick things off, thank the Conservation District staff. They've been just Elizabeth, Andy, everyone right on down, fantastic to work with. And I think we've got a really good product here in the feasibility study that you all have. TPL is a national nonprofit land conservation organization. We work to connect everyone with nature, and we do that in a variety of different ways. Andrew and I work in what we call our conservation finance group, and our work is at the state and local level to create new sources of public funding for parks and conservation. And much of that is through ballot measures, questions that are placed before voters asking them to dedicate funding of one sort or another for parks and conservation. This is just a snapshot of our results in the last general election, the midterm election in November of 2022. We were involved in 34 different ballot measures around the country. 31 of them were approved by the voters, and that created about 8.4 billion in new funding for conservation. This last election, the off year, much less ballot measure activity, we were only involved in 6 measures on the ballot just last week, but 5 of those were approved by the voters, creating about a little more than $1 billion in new funding for parks and conservation. Since we started our conservation finance program in 1996, we've been involved in more than 650 successful state and local ballot measures, creating about $94 billion in new funding for parks and conservation. And we've had the great good fortune to win about 83% of the ballot measures we support. And the reason for that, we believe, is the process that we're working with the Conservation District on now. When voters in Illinois at the Forest Preserve District or Conservation District level have been given the opportunity to vote on funding for conservation, almost invariably they voted yes, supporting it. You can see a number of different Forest Preserve districts, including the McHenry County measure in 2007. And we've supported a number of those measures. Again, we had the pleasure of working with the Conservation District and citizens in McHenry County in 2007 on the successful $73 million bond issue. And then most recently, we worked with the Forest Preserve District of Cook County on a property tax increase that was on the November 2022 ballot to help fund their conservation and restoration efforts. This is what we call our conservation finance methodology. And again, this is what we believe leads to success in terms of dedicating new funds for conservation and open space and parks. It starts with right where we are now, which is what we call feasibility research. You're going to hear a lot more about that from Andrew this evening, but it's really beginning to assemble all the facts that we need to make decisions about our ballot measure. Almost always we follow the feasibility research with public opinion research. Usually that takes the form of a poll of voters in the jurisdiction we're working on. We'll talk a little bit more about that too as a possible next step. Based on what we learned in the feasibility study and the poll, we're then able to make a pretty well-informed recommendation to the Conservation District about whether or not you should proceed with the ballot measure, and if so, how the measure should be designed. We always call out the actual ballot language, what the voters see before they're getting ready to cast their ballot as a separate step, critically important that voters understand what they're voting on. Assuming a measure was referred to the ballot by the Conservation District, then we'd be working with citizens, private citizens in McHenry County to organize and run a campaign to advocate for passage of the ballot measure. So that's our basic conservation finance methodology, and where we are now with the Conservation District is right on that first step, feasibility research. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew.
All right, thanks, Will, and thanks again to everybody with the district and Elizabeth and Andy for their help in putting together the report. It always it takes a village with these reports, and appreciate the time everyone has spent with it. As Will mentioned, feasibility research is the first stage of our working in a jurisdiction. The crux of which is looking at the financing options for parks and open space. And in the case of McHenry County Conservation District, that takes the form of the property tax increase via the PTEL and general obligation bonding, which the county is familiar with. We'll look at fiscal capacity, how the county's done economically, election history, how has the district and county voters voted on various tax-related items over the past 10 or 15 years. We call out election requirements and ballot language requirements, making sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's as we look forward, and we look at best practices and what other jurisdictions have done to fund parks and open space throughout Illinois. And here's an example, or here's the table of contents for the report, which hopefully many of you have seen, going over those subjects. Next slide, Will. And so we focused in again on two main funding mechanisms. The first being an increase in the limiting rate and the increase in the property tax. If you look to the greenish row there, with Andy's help and others, we've targeted a 0.027% limiting rate increase, which would generate about $3 million annually, or $60 million over 20 years. If we continue to break that down, that's about $27 per year for the average homeowner, if you include the $8,000 exemption, and that would be on a $326,000 home. If we continue to break that down, that would be about $9 per year per $100,000 of value, of home value. And again, if we include the homestead exemption, that drops even further to about $7 a year annually. The property tax increase can be used for operations and maintenance as well as capital improvements, something the bond cannot. Bonds can only be used for capital improvements. We called out the $27 per year figure per average home, as we tend to see drop off in support throughout the country. Through looking at our various polls, we see a drop off in support at about $30 per year or more. So we generally will try to keep it in that ballpark. We've certainly won above that and below that, depending upon the campaign, but that's a reason for calling out that in that range of about $30 per year. Will, anything more on this slide?
No, I think you covered it, Andrew.
All right, next slide, please. It seemed through our discussions that we were looking at a PTEL increase, but wanted to make sure that we included looking at general obligation bonding, again, similar to the 2007 and 2001 referenda. Again, if you pull out a row here, say $65 million bond, and you go over a little bit more, you see the average cost per home being about $47 per year. Again, that's outside of our $30 per year conversation we just had. $50 million would be more in the $30 ballpark there. Again, can only be used for capital improvements, could not fund operations and maintenance of the district if that was one of the priorities set forth by the Conservation District. Next slide, Will. I want to thank Andy in particular for providing us this chart. With the retirement of debt over the next several years, even with a property tax increase, you see that by 2026, the overall tax bill for the district will drop by 45%, which puts us in a really good Will or Andy, if you're out there, anything more on this particular slide?
I don't have anything else.
Yeah, only again, it is this slide assumes that the Conservation District would refer the 0.027% increase in the limiting rate to the ballot, and that McHenry County voters would approve it. So that's how you go from $209 in 2023 up to $240, $244 in 24-25. And then, as Andrew said, in 26, the Conservation District expects to retire your remaining outstanding bonds, which would drop the overall tax impact for homeowners, property owners in McHenry County, nearly 50%. So. Great. So thanks so much, Andrew. The next step for us would be to conduct a public opinion survey, a poll of voters there in McHenry County, testing very specifically a ballot measure as much as it might appear if the Conservation District trustees were to refer one to the ballot. We work with professional pollsters, and we have pollster in mind that's worked with us in the Chicago area and actually in McHenry County, John Wilson of John Wilson Research. Elizabeth is familiar with him as well, but we can test a number of things in the poll that provide us with some data to make those decisions about how we design our ballot measure going forward. And really what we're looking for from the trustees tonight is not really approval or any kind of a formal vote, but more a sense from you that you're ready to take this next step, and that the finance mechanism that makes the most sense is the increase in the limiting rate at the 0.027%. And with that information, we would go forward using private funds to see what McHenry County voters think about that. So I think that wraps up our presentation, Elizabeth and Chairman Dunn. We'd be happy to answer any questions or hear what the trustees think.
Thank you. John, do you have any comments or questions?
Well, I think on our last week when we
Broke down in like committees.
broke down our committee. I don't feel that next year is going to be an easy year to get this through. I think that knowing what the taxpayers are going to see in an increase in their property taxes, I think that they're going to be pressed to move in more gains in their taxes. But I am just a liaison. I'm not a voter.
No, I'm just in support of it. I've said that on that committee now, one was in the last. I don't know, year is it?
A year.
Yeah, it's been a year. Discussed it and. I'm just I'm in support of it, I see it's not really an increase in taxes, it's really more just continuing to capture what we want to capture.
Unfortunately, there is a little bit of an increase at first, and then you see a big drop.
Yeah. I think it's the message, and but that's why we're working with Will, and I think that's the movement forward, is the presentation that was saying. You see some of the wording in the packet that was handed out, see, I think it could be really well to the voters, it'll be difficult year next year, but the track record of conservation winning is good. I think we have a lot to offer. I know our community is seeing what the conservation district has done through COVID, and I think that momentum is still behind us.
Ray, anything to add there?
No, I think I echo a lot of what Sean said. I think for the important piece for me is, and I know TPO is working this, but Sean said is working that message about that drop off in that future year. There are a lot of restrictions on how things get worded. How the messages can be spread, but making sure that we're educating the public on that it is a net decrease in the future. So.
Yeah, we're moving forward, and I'm respectful of John's concern. And I think that, since that's one of the next steps would be surveying, hopefully we'll get some information back. And if there is a concern among the community that, that ought to be picked up in the survey. So, I think at this point, the system's ahead and we'll find out. Right.
When we had this little meeting before, I said the average homeowner, what's it like $9 and $100,000. That's probably not gonna. That's just compared to school taxes, but I'm saying. Got to take the poll and We'll see what it.
Yeah, I would be favor of moving ahead. I think the messaging will be really important. You had mentioned, Dad, relative to some of the other property tax implications, like for the school district and what have you. So I think $9 per 100K is something most people would support. So I perceive it putting it for the voters.
And also that drop in.
It has to be, I think that's a key part of the messaging.
Well, I think you got our consensus on that then, well, Andrew.
Great, thank you very much for that. I share John's concern, quite frankly, and just want to lay out there the argument for 2024, which is we know that these types of park and conservation measures always do better in higher turnout elections, and obviously the presidential election is the highest turnout election in McHenry County and really anywhere in the United States. So that's why we have been targeting that election. But I think his point is very well taken, that given the overall tax burden of the county taxpayers and property owners, it could also be wise to wait until 2026. So in my mind, both of those options are on the table. We will certainly be testing tax tolerance very specifically in our poll of McHenry County voters and be able to provide that information back to you. And if we don't believe that there's sufficient support to move forward at this time, we won't hesitate to make that recommendation to you. In fact, about a third of the time, our recommendation to the jurisdictions we're working with is this is not the right time to go forward. I appreciate the support from the trustees of going forward with the poll, and we will do that, and we will certainly be back in close touch with you and your staff. I'm happy to answer any other questions. So
I don't think there's any other questions at this point, but I look forward to hearing back after the polls.
Will and Andrew, thank you so much for all your time and your team. We do appreciate that. We'll be back in touch. And I also just want to give a shout out. We did have 2 trustees that did serve on this working group that spent a lot of extra time. Vice President Everard and Trustee Zimmerman is stated to work as well as we could do as we broke down, and our executive team and communications, as well as our foundation. We had representation as well. So I wish to thank everybody for that thought leadership. And we'll move on to next steps with Paul.
great. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all very much. We're gonna sign off if that's all right, Elizabeth. So
Yes.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Classification, compensation, reporting, implementation. Recommendation from HR.
Switching here, I'm gonna make co-host. We have Rachel Skaggs with us from GovHR. She presented at the board back in September. Rachel, let's see, I just want to make sure I've made you co-host here. I have, and then I'm going to stop my screen. So you can present your screen. And
Great.
we'll go through the reconsideration process.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Just get this going. All right. Thanks for having me back. I'm just going to go through a short PowerPoint and talk about what's been going on since the last time I presented. Just about 3 or 4 slides, and then happy to answer any questions and talk through things further. So since the draft report and that information was presented, we went through the reconsideration process. So that process opened it up to employees and positions to submit a reconsideration form. So we made those, or the Conservation District made those forms available on September 22nd. And then employees had until October 6th to submit those to HR. And through the reconsideration process, we really kind of focus on these 3 categories. Well, kind of 2 and then other. The first one they could submit a reconsideration based on is internal equity. So if they believe their position has been graded incorrectly compared to the others in the organization. The second would be a job title recommendation if they believe their position should have a different job title or the job title that was recommended wasn't correct. And then third, any other aspect of the study that isn't covered by those two that I stated. So those were kind of the three categories that they were able to submit a reconsideration form based on. We did receive 17 position reconsideration requests. It's important to note that sometimes a couple employees or multiple employees or all employees in a certain position submitted one, but we really just look at the position itself. So we received 17 position reconsideration requests. So 17 positions that we looked at for reconsideration. And those reconsiderations kind of fell into these three categories. Thinking their compensation range is too low based on the current range, the position is classified too low, or the market data for the position is incorrect. So after we received all of those reconsideration forms, we looked at those, reviewed and analyzed those in detail and made changes where appropriate. I think in every instance there were changes made. However, it's important to note that a change in a score doesn't always impact the skill level or the job classification change for that position. So although there were changes for all 17 of those kind of reconsideration, it really resulted in 11 positions that moved grades as a result of that reconsideration process. After that was done, it's important to look holistically and how that impacts all the positions and take a deep, broad look at the internal equity and the classification plan. So after that, there was an additional 3 positions that were also adjusted to make sure that internal equity was maintained within the reconsideration process. I think I already touched on the first 2 bullet points here, but then the third thing, there was some cases where market data was also edited or adjusted based on those as well. So we looked at that information too. However, the pay ranges did not change based on those changes to the market data, but it's still important to include and incorporate those changes as the final product gets put together. So again, after we reviewed all the reconsideration forms, analyzed those, made appropriate changes to the job factor analysis scores, we looked holistically at all positions and made sure that that internal equity was maintained and the external market competitiveness was still appropriate for all the grades. So that kind of just gives you a quick summary of the process of what we've been doing since the draft report was presented last. Elizabeth, if you have anything to add, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer questions too.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that we did do is we did meet with each of the directors and the individual department managers. So we went through with this final reclassification to share the process and what the outcomes were and what was being presented, as well as the next steps. And again, we did have a working group with this. So Vice President Everard and Trustee Wasiorek did work with Director of Finance and Administration Dilek and Jenny Hyder as our Human Resources Manager to review, which is the next phase of the implementation and the discussion on the financial recommendations of such with the study. So I think unless you have questions specifically on this part for GovHR and Rachel, and she can answer any questions you have with that, then we can go over into the recommendation steps.
You're good with everything. We good? No, I think we're all good with that.
Okay, so and Andy, do you want me to just go over? So for next week, and I'll just highlight very quickly. I don't have a slide for this, but it was in your packet. Andy, we talked a cost analysis of implementation. Oh, you have it already embedded in that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll let Andy go over that, but just to kind of just go quickly into the final ask for next week that you'll see on the regular agenda, there's several items on the motion and they've been broken out. Correct, that's 13.2. And so one would be to accept the final report in classification and compensation study prepared and presented by GovHR of Northbrook. Number 2, to adopt the new grade and salary wage schedule is presented for fiscal year 2024. Third was to be to authorize the executive director or her designee to update the district's job descriptions with the changes as presented, and that's in your packet. 4, to authorize a 15-year range adjustment at 65% of market to address compression at the midpoint of the salary wage range and promote progression through the new salary wage structure. 5, authorize the implementation of the new grade and salary wage structure and salary wage adjustments as presented with an effective date of December 10th of 2023 for a total estimated cost of $94,626 for fiscal year 2024 and fund from budget resources existing within the unanticipated expenses. And so the details, Andy will go into the detail, but that'll be the motion. It is long. It's not on consent agenda. So you don't need to read all that. It is on the other board business, but it's really important that each things name very specific to give us the authority to move forward.
I guess if we just step back in terms of the process, first of all, I just think they did a really good job. HR did a really good job. Andy, a lot of work went into it. But the way the process works is you take a job description, job title, and you assign points to it. And the points, and there's like a cookbook that says, if a CPA degree is required, that's where so many points on the finance scale and so on. An hourly range, you have to drive a fork truck, or you have a truck over road truck driver license. Those kinds of things that just add points. You add up the points, and that tells you what range you ought to fall in once you've got those ranges established. So they did a great job of that. The market data that they used, they use that to set the new ranges. That looks great. We were over the market before. Now we've making these changes, and we're more in the market. And Andy's data will show that. We had a compression issue. The work that's been done here will alleviate that compression issue, particularly with adding a 15-year employees are getting an extra bump once they hit that anniversary of 15. So if you remember that one chart, there was all those, kind of went up, and there was all those dots in that scatter diagram right in the middle. This helps shrink that and lengthen out the graph. So, and Andy's picture will show that. So bottom line is a lot of work went into this. I think it was a very robust process. I think the end product is good, and I support the proposal full-heartedly and ask for your support.
Absolutely. I think the methodology was right on, very straightforward, very objective.
Rachel, thank you so much for your assistance in all of this, and everybody has the final report. So any questions that you just have, please feel free to reach out. We'll have to answer. Andy's setting up for the budget presentation. I think that's next.
Yeah, next you're on 2029. That changes in finance.
So what Andy it's been very busy, as you know, obviously with all of this work. We've had several big projects that we've been working on. So in the last year or so, we've been able to get at this meeting basically almost a final product of at least our budget, which you see that it's the number of years it goes to the county, which will approve in tentative form in January. So you're going to get all the large macro numbers and some history here. In December, we will present you the layout. So you'll get a chance to read the narrative before you see it in January. It's just we need more time to pull all those pieces together and make it pretty. So I think I made you a co-host, Andy.
All right. So the tentative budget really is done. All the department budgets, all the information's gathered, it's input into the system. So everything you're going to see tonight is really how it's going to look when we hand you that package. But I am going to go into a lot of what we did in August because I don't want to just give you a really quick overview, because when you get that tentative, I want you to have a good feel for it. So a lot of this will be a little bit redundant. I'm going to move fast just because I know some of it's repetitive, but if you have questions, if you want me to slow down, just say the word. So just a quick outline of what we'll look at is an overview of the proposed tentative budget, both the revenues and expenditures. We're gonna compare that to what we showed you in August, because a lot of it hasn't changed. A lot of it's very similar to what we showed you in August. And then we'll compare it obviously to the 24 budget that we're in today to see how it compares year over year. And then we're gonna review the new compensation structure, the cost impacts for 24 and 25. This is kind of an overview on that. So Elizabeth, Jenny, if there's anything you want to add as I get to that, please, by all means, feel free to step in. This first slide is the consensus that we presented in August that we asked the board to give us to build the budget. So these are the 5 things we were basically looking for. The first one said we were looking for that full 5.8% PTEL increase. Obviously the board said they weren't comfortable with that, so we modified that to 4.9. And then we wanted to hold all the wage cost increases to a 6.5% total growth. Personnel costs limited to 3.5%. And again, this is the slide we showed you, so I'm not changing anything. And then capital spending, at that time we had 1.2 million, and I had a plus there in blue to highlight that was, we were presenting in August, so we're only 4 months into the year. We know there were going to be more capital requests coming, so we passed out. I think that Christy got a chance to. So we gave you a listing of those additionals, and we'll go through a little bit of that. And then the total reserve spend was going to be $1.2 million spent from the general fund. Again, it has a plus by because additional capital is going to require more of a capital spend. Hopefully we're all familiar what drives that general fund revenue. The tax is making up 80% of it, farm lease 10, collecting just 90. And then we presented, the PTEL possibility to take that full 5.8% at 499,000. That got reduced down to 4.9% or 424,000. So we gave up about $75,000 in tax revenue. I always feel the need that I need to update this and showing that the district over the last 13 years has had an average total PTEL increase of only 1.6% versus almost 2.9 that would have been available to us. So over that time period, we forfeited $10.3 million. And more importantly, that annual operating PTEL levy increase would have been additional 1.5 million a year. So had we just taken that full PTEL, we'd be able to levy additional 1.5 each year going forward. Looking at the farm lease income, we looked at this graph back in August. That blue line shows the farm futures that we were watching last year in December or during calendar year 22. And then around October, we built and locked in the budget where it says fiscal year 24 at $6 a bushel. By the end of February, that it actually averaged out to $5.91. So it was pretty close to what we budgeted, not exact. When we presented in August, circled there in orange, the corn futures were right around 5.15, 5.09. Today, not today, but last week when I updated this, they're at 5.18. So they haven't moved much, which is a good thing, better than it falling off. In August, we presented 3 different scenarios for corn. So we had it at 575, 520, which is that dark blue line, and then 475. And that dark blue line was scenario 2, and we said that's our best guess, and that's how we're going to build the budget at that time. And that is how we're locking it in. So that's what we use as a tentative. So there's been no change in farm lease revenue projected for budget 25 from what we showed you in August. Program revenues are unchanged from what we showed you. I'll go through them quickly. Can't see the top there. Education programs, we show them growing by 15%. We went through that quite a bit. Hunting fees, we show growing 16% or $8,000. That's because we added additional zones. Camping and shelter fees, we have a small increase of 10%, about $4,800. And then as you look then budget 24 to what's going to be the tentative budget 25, you see a total growth of 27,000 or 15% for those program revenues. Then looking at the investments, this one did change a little bit. The light blue lines that I presented in August, 297,000. I just can't see the top of it. Can you guys control that? And refining that, we're spending a little bit more reserves in this, and while I kind of updated those cash flow projections, so I reduced that down to 277,000. So that's what will be in there for investment income fiscal year 25. About a $20,000 decrease from where we thought we'd be in August. The state personal property replacement tax, we talked a lot about it. We talked about it's very difficult for the state to predict, yet alone us. A lot of the money is basically diverted out of their fund, and they really can't predict or control when it happens. And then, so we had created 3 different scenarios of that, all of them showing a downtrend because that's what we expected to happen based on some information. then we finally got the state's basically projection for the district. It showed about a 30% decrease. So what we used in August was that dark blue bar, $450,000 expected income. It's still a big increase over budget of 24, but a big decrease from where we actually are, both fiscal year 23 and 24. So that's the number we used in August. It hasn't changed. That's still our best guess. So looking at all the revenues together, budget to budget, that's this is from what we showed you in August to what the tentative budget's going to be. We show a decrease in property taxes of 74,000. Again, that's the difference. We came in with the 5.8. It's reduced down to 4.9. Investment income down to $18,000. So total revenues are lower by 92,000 from what we presented in August. If you compare budget 24 to 25 now, you see total property taxes increasing 5.1%, but be assured the levy's only increasing 4.9. That levy is the full PTEL levy. It's the general fund, insurance fund, and the Social Security. We're not increasing the insurance fund. It has a substantial fund balance in there. So a little bit, and I think it's about $17,000 or $16,000 is shifted into the general fund, which allows that 0.2% increase over the 4.9 levy. And then we see total revenues year over year, then budget 24 to 25 growing by 4.2%. Other operating expenses, and we kind of just put this up here to give you a feel for what they were, the same slide that I showed back in August. So these are really largely non-discretionary: utilities, fuel, property taxes the district pays, promote legal, dues and subscriptions. So in total, there's $90,000 90% of the other operating expenses just in these few line items. To give you a feel that they're really, if we're going to do what we're going to do, these costs are going to get incurred. And then we show this slide, which shows the non-personnel, non-capital. The blue line's the budget, right? And so you can see it's basically flat year over year. In fact, you can go from fiscal year 14, all the way to fiscal year 24, almost no change. And the green shows how that should have grown if it was able to increase it by inflation. So there's about a $700,000 in savings there that we've done. Basically, staff gets the credit for really working hard to keep those down. In July, we brought forward showed the inflation calendar year to date through July. It was 3%. So we asked the board to go ahead and let the operating non-personnel, non-capital grow by 3.5%. The board allowed that. To date through October, that CPI growth is now 3.7%. So if you look at budget to budget, just like the board had set that guideline, it's going to grow by 3.5%, 24 to 25, or $83,000. Then getting to the personnel. So as we showed from 2010 through 20, when inflation was pretty low, the district did a nice job of basically aligning that economic wage increase with the rate of inflation. As inflation took off in 21 and 22, we fell way behind. Last year, the board allowed that 4.7% economic increase. So this year we asked for, the board approved that 4%. So that's been worked in there as well. And that's the same as we had in August, obviously. And then we knew the compensation structures, compensation study was coming. So we had asked to allow for a 6.5%. We actually presented a couple different scenarios, but the board settled on a 6.5% total growth year over year, budget to budget, including that 4% across the board. That's for 25. And then the concept of implementing that study this year was brought forward in fiscal year 24. And the guideline was set out as long as it can be done within that 100,000 had been set aside for unanticipated. So in the review committee that Elizabeth talked about, I ran a lot of different scenarios, and I'm going to look at just a couple of them. So and the costs related to them. So a couple things to remember is this orange highlight. That's the cost increase compared to the budget 24. It includes about $56,000 that we have right now offered to the FOP, the police officers and sergeants. That represents a full year's growth for those guys, right? Because their contract expired 3/31. Historically, we've always paid the retro. That's kind of a given, and that's our history. So the assumption is whatever happens, we'd be paying for the whole year. So a big chunk of that had already eaten up by that police offer that's on the table. They haven't accepted it, but that's why it's included. So doing nothing new, no 10-year increase, because that's what GovHR originally recommended to handle compression, doing nothing new, no 10-year, no 15. It's still a $76,000 overall additional cost in 24. And then if you look year over year, the total growth in 25, that would be 6.3%. So there's not a lot of room to work to get from 6.3 to that cap of 6.5. GovHR in the original report has suggested taking everybody at 10 years and moving them to the 75th percentile. Again, in this year, that $126,000, it's not a huge number, but it's only 1/4 of the year. If you look out to what happens then in 25, you're looking at a 7.6% total wage cost increase. And that's obviously not very affordable and falls way outside that 6.5%. So the review committee recommended, and that's what Elizabeth just highlighted before this, that we really can't do an increase at 10 years because there's too many people. It's very costly. You get way ahead of that 6.5%. So we moved out to 15-year. We looked at a couple of different options and ultimately settled on if you have 15 years of experience in the current job, we would move you to the 65th percentile of your range. So that's not quite halfway between the mid and the max, right? Halfway between the mid and max would be the 75th percentile. So we'll go down a little bit more and you're just off of that mid. The total cost of that, and this year if we implement it, would fall within that 100,000. That's the 94,626. And then year over year, we look at a 6.5% increase, including that 4% across the board.
And then just adding that, if you do that in subsequent years, it's far less.
Mhm.
It's like $8,000 one year, it drops way off after that
Yeah.
first.
And I think, yeah, I show that here. Good time. So this shows the cost of that new structure, and the one I just highlighted is the 15 years. So you can see the impacts really in year 1 and 2. The first year is obviously just the 4 months, December through March, and then the second year is a full year. But as you look across, nobody hits that anniversary in 26, and then only a couple people hit it in 27 and 28. And then down below, this is the total cost, then additional increase of that new structure altogether, right? So in 25, you see an increase of $154,000. Again, this does not include the 4%. Now, this is just the cost of implementing the structure. And then that's the additional increases going forward in 26, 27, and 28. And again, that's assuming that people here today are still here in 28, because if they're not, then those costs aren't going to exist. Under the current status quo system we have, it's very similar once you get beyond the implementation of 24 and 25. If you look at in 26, under the new system, you'd see the cost of be 42,814. Under our 4.7, they'd be 42,351. So again, you look at all 3 of those years, they're very comparable. So if we did nothing, you'd still, under our 4.7, you'd still have some pretty big increase. And again, that's because there's not a ton of people after you pay, hit them that first year that have the 15-year anniversary, you bump them up. There's not many people coming on for quite some time. This is the graph we'd showed before that shows the compression. So this is how it exists today if we don't do anything. With 75% of the staff paid at or below the midpoint. Remember, the midpoint is the market average at the 50th percentile. With that 15-year bump, it changes. The graph really doesn't illustrate it, but I think it's 10 people that would get bumped up above that mid, and now that 75 falls to 69%. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And then we look at wages in year over year, you see the total growth of 6.8%, not 6.5%. So we've gone above that threshold. And that difference between 0.8 and 0.5 represents $16,000. Not a lot, but in my mind, I was very careful to try and find, something that worked within those parameters that we had. And as I brought all the information together, what I found was that both the Lipner and operations increased their seasonal hours quite a bit. So I accounted for the increase in the seasonal wages, but I didn't anticipate that. There's a total, this is kind of a rough estimate, a total seasonal hour increase of about 1,000 hours or 7%. And if you take that at $16.25 an hour, it comes up to 17 grand. So that's the difference, just taking away the 6.5%. It's not an increase in wage per se, it's an increase in labor. A lot of that, I know I had a chance to talk to Perry about the operations. They're extending the mowing season based on the weather. They're having to mow a month earlier, holding some guys longer. The other thing, the reason I didn't pick up on it right away is that they had to absorb both the seasonal wage hourly increase and any hour increase in total within their budget. So if they grew that line item in their budget, they had to reduce something else, and that's why I didn't pick up on it until I had a chance to get everything together. IMRF, we know, went down to 8.7%, and in fact, it's been going down for the last 5 years. So it's nice to see we're getting well vested in it now. We have some years with the program. The returns on their investments too are obviously helping that a lot. So on the retirement side, year over year, we see, even with those wages going up, we see a total cost of retirement going down by 0.4%. This is a slide we showed in August for the insurance. Basically, we had projected at that time a 9.5% overall cost of insurance increase. The reality is that we got that 7.4%. A lot of that has to do with who's selecting what plans at this point in time. There's an open enrollment coming, so that can change, but this is how it's going to get locked in for this budget year. There's always some changes going on after we lock it down. In total, then, if you look at the budget 24 to 25, you see a 6% total growth in personnel. And it's interesting too, last year from 23 to 24, our wages actually grew 6.1% because of that 4.7% across the board. So we're not even that much higher than we were last year. And then based on where we were in August, we were projecting a 6.2% increase in total personnel. So actually the tentative budget will show a little lower total personnel cost increase than we had in August. And the last thing we have to cover is the capital outlays. This is what we showed you in August. We had total capital outlays of 1.2 million. $1 million of that was vehicles. Everything that we gave you in August with the detail, none of it's changed. It still would be part of the tentative budget. What has changed and what we passed out tonight is we've added, again, that was in August, as managers putting together their budget and putting their hands to it, other items come up. So there's costs in front of you. If you want me to run down them, I can. If you have questions about them, that would be a good time to ask. The total increase of all those is an additional $209,000. What's that?
It's the increase.
Yeah, increased capital. So the capital would go from 1.2 to 1.4.
There's something which is recent about mechanical seat spreader, I think, that those were already in the budget. Was that?
Yeah, anything that we presented in August would still be in there today. So it would be all of that, 1.2 million, plus these you're gonna see added on to it.
I remember 2 years ago, they had this big discussion about that Avery. Remember, that wasn't that with the foundation and it's like reinventing a wheel. So now they gotta spend $10 in there, like just a big cage.
Does someone know more specifically about the design of the Avery? We know the foundation.
It was
Yeah.
never done.
It was not.
Yeah, it was not done.
And that's where the foundation, we had pledged and we didn't have staff capacity, so therefore we had to go back and we weren't ready. So with this being presented, I'm assuming that we're ready to roll. We have our building maintenance group and design and.
And the cage is 2 years older.
It must be expensive.
Well, it is, and those are the birds that they use in the programs for the school. And I think that's, I don't know if Sarah's on to give you the exact age, but that cage is fairly old.
I remember that was like a big discussion. I was trying to get this thing. And then the other thing was upgrade the police squad. What do they gotta do? Like hire tech stuff?
I believe that's just setting up the squad. after we
Oh.
purchase it, and they didn't get in the original budget in August. So
Anybody else? Motion?
they'll actually be capitalized as part of the squad purchase. I'm just calling them out separately
Oh,
because we didn't have them in August. So in summary, if you look at the budget 24 to 25, you see total revenues growing 438,000 or 4.2%. Total expenditures before the capital growing by 570,000. We, in 24, we had a net surplus, operating surplus before capital of 31,000. Now we're showing $100,000 deficit, so it's a growth in deficit, so to speak, of 131,000. When we back out the capital, we'll see a total reserve spend in 24 of 1,026,256. And then a total reserve spend budgeted for 25 of 1,648,000. So an increase of 622. That doesn't include any, obviously, expenditures that go unexpended, and on average year, it's 4 to 5%. So there would be additional probably $400,000. I mean, the reality is we'll probably have a deficit of 1 million, 1.1 million. But on paper, it's 1.6. If everything we budgeted gets spent, you'd see the reserves go down by 1.6 million. Absolutely, I don't know. And then just to recap real quickly, just to go back to those original guidelines the board gave us. So we had the PTO increase of 5.8, as we saw, 4.9, which incorporated total wages 6.8 versus a 6.5. Non-personnel, we stuck right at the 3.5%. Capital and spending, we said 1.2 plus, it's 1.4 million. And then the total reserve spend would be the 1.6 versus 1.3. Yeah, and that is it. Thank you. Any questions? Let me stop my share.
Well, all the compensation, the changes that we made are all, we were all included in that.
Yep.
All right, I think that should be that.
Thank you, Amy, for doing that.
Thank you, Andy. Yes. Get a drink of water. Okay, we'll move on to 6.1, review of the regular meeting agenda. I do want to point out 12.7 on that. And there's some changes that have to be made for several reasons. It was just like cycles.
Yeah, so, and John can help me, let me pull it up here. So 12.7, we went out to bid. The bids came in, obviously inflation greater than what was budgeted. So staff is recommending generally with this type of climate, they're not going down. They're going to only increase if we wait to delay, and we've built all this way to move forward. So the recommendation is to go forward. Another project that was on the books to be able to be implemented time-wise, we're not going to be able to do that. Some of that was as you recall, the discussion on the relocation or looking at the building for our shop plan. And so they would look to take some of the money from that to afford that and get this done and then go back and revisit that. Did I capture that right, John and Amy?
Yeah, it's crossing at Hartford Park. It's needs some both safety improvements and improvements to meet compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act. This project gets both those done. We estimated these projects a lot of times, as Andy's pointed out, budgeting is, almost 2 years ago that we were cost estimating. We've had escalation in cost. We've recognized that there were subpar road base up there that needs to be addressed. And as there are a couple of options presented, and one of them would be to rebid in the spring, but immediately we no, it's not going to come back with at less.
Well,
it'll be
a lot of the other bidders.
Yes, we got a good price, and we got a good contractor, so that's why we're recommending this quote.
Other questions? So we should probably go ahead and do that. Good. All right, is there anything else you want to look at?
The only other things I wanted to mention, you see there's a few items, they're just account transfers. One for the Trust for Public Land donation, that's just being resources so we can get forward with the donation to them for their work on the technical assistance, as we discussed with them during our meetings. And then the last is to implement the compensation study. Once you get through that motion, we have movement so that we can expend it appropriately. So those are just, it's not familiar with everyone, that's the process of just keeping our house in order and doing what we legally need to do to spend the dollars. But any other questions otherwise? I mean, we're happy to answer anything else that is of interest. The bidding, John, about the electrical, we went out to bid, we got the results on that. Yeah.
Yeah. We're locked in with good rates, trying something a little bit new this year, but it's something that he's been watching, this consultant's been watching, called indexing. And he's got about a dozen or so of his government clients moved to it. And it's beating ComEd prices by about 20%, as opposed to where we were in the past at about 12% or so. So in rough calculation in my head was at that 12%, we were saving about $14,000 to $15,000 a year over the ComEd price. This is probably going to take it to 20 to 22. So so we're watching it. It's a little bit new for us, but I think it's going to save us some money.
Good. Hey, anything else to report yourself?
The only thing, just a few items. Again, we'll work with you if you've not been hooked up with your authenticator app and getting into our email. I appreciate everybody's patience and challenging. Once we get through this, we'll want to kind of get through and make sure you're communicating on district email and not personal email as a reminder, but we've been sending to both just so that we're able to communicate. So we got most tonight, but we'll get everybody all set. Enhanced Networks is doing a great job in transitioning on us. And I know Andy's eager. We've put out the job for the IT systems administrator. He's been starting to review the applications and he'll begin that process. So there has been some good bites on that. So again, optimistic. We look forward to having that position filled, as well as with the movement. We announced a few other individuals beyond Stephanie with that job leaving. We've got a team member from our operations team that's leaving for another job, Josh Curran. And so we're looking to make some internal moves there. Basically once that gets through, with people changing different areas of regions, that gives an opportunity, and it looks as if we'll have somebody moving up from a Ranger 1 to a Ranger 2, and then that will open up. We'll post for that Ranger 1 position. I think that's the direction on that. We just also learned that Bob Menard, who's been our volunteer coordinator, will be retiring this February. And so we'll be looking to begin that process. Bob's done a great job with our volunteers and engaging them and that. So we'll be taking a look on that front. And police officer. So with all the movement that we've had there, we also are hopefully getting close to offering a position and getting that filled. The announcements, McCog annual dinner, for anyone that's interested, I heard from Sean, Trustee Zimmerman, heard from you. It is on the 13th of December. So if you have an interest in going, that is a very well attended event. It's not really a program, but more of an opportunity to connect with the other elected officials in county. Green drinks, and I don't want to take away for those with green drinks, but December 6th, just because it's coming up, there will be a feature on successes of the conservation organization. So the district will be speaking about our successes the past year. Our foundation will be speaking on their successes, as well as other environmental groups in the county. So that will be a fun event and not to miss. And then the just a reminder, the IPERI IAPD conference is at the end of January. And if you're interested, we just want to get and make the early bird deadline. And so I will send out again another information. Just let me know and we'll package all that stuff up. But that is a good educational conference, a lot of things to take away from and just to connect. And we have many team members going down to speak this year. So that is all that I have for my report. Happy Thanksgiving. Well, I'll see you next Tuesday before Thanksgiving.
We'll go to public comments, which can include anybody from staff. Has any comments? Is there any things that need to be talked about? Yeah. Any public? Anybody in the public?
Doesn't appear to be.
We've got, again, there's someone out that's not staff, but I don't know that for sure. Anyone from out in the public that wishes to make public comment? We're not seeing it.
Take a motion to adjourn.
Second. Or I'll make a motion.
Motion seconded for adjournment.
Trustee Reservoir,
Agree? Yeah.
Treasurer Gayton, Treasurer Gayton,
Yes.
Secretary Fritz,
Yes.
Trustee Zimmerman,
Yes.
Vice President Everard,
Yeah.
and President Dom.
Thank you so much.